is Soul Science with Risa. What is esoteric or soul-centered astrology, and how might we discern and differentiate it from exoteric, traditional, or personality-based astrology? The key to esoteric astrology is really in the way in which it seeks to identify the quality of the more subtle form of consciousness that belongs to a person as it pertains to that solar aspect, which is seeking to pattern and restructure and synthesize the inherited equipment that comes from the personality or the form life to suit that will of the soul and the desire of the soul in terms of what it wants to create within the incarnation. It's not so much about the soul having this authoritative dominion over the body, although there's a degree of it coming in as a primary authority when an individual does shift into a soul-centered kind of consciousness. But it's really more about that, it coming in and trying to work with and synthesize and purify and reveal actually the deeper purpose for why the personality has particular gifts and talents and abilities in this life. Prior to that shift into a more soul-centered consciousness, it's really just the personality and what it wants to do with its own gifts. Mostly for selfish ends. And that doesn't have to mean that the person is bad, but it's really about, this is what I want to do, this is what I get enjoyment from, and it's just about me. And here is what defines soul consciousness from personality consciousness, and that is that the soul, in its deepest essence, is that which is fundamentally unity-based. It is gifting-based. It is naturally, in its state, oriented towards the contribution and the connection to the whole. And so that shift from personality to soul-centered consciousness is that reorientation of the human life to serving that which is of a greater principle than merely the immediate needs, desires, and comforts of the individual life. So, inherent within that connection to soul consciousness is a degree of sacrifice or a humble bending to that which is greater than one's own immediate life circumstances. So, esoteric astrology points us to those more subtle influences that come from a more subtler place. It shows us the way in which the soul wants to pattern the lower consciousness. And when a person starts waking up to that soul connection, that is typically defined by an uncomfortable realization of one's own duality. That is to say that one acknowledges that there are these two primary motivating forces. One might say, I want to make my life something about something greater than myself. And I would like to put my gifts towards something that's more everlasting in terms of the contribution, beyond just the living out of my personal life fulfillments, desires, etc. When someone shifts into that orientation, we start to see, okay, there's this impulse that has this benevolent or sacrificial quality or a yearning versus this part of my old self or the typical self or the more constructed, normalized form of self, which is really like, nah, I don't know if I want to do that. It seems like a lot of effort, but if I have to sacrifice towards this, then I might have to give up this thing, and maybe I don't want to do that. So there's this innate duality between the deeper promptings and that normal constructed life. And so the objective of the soul, and this is beyond astrology at this point, but the objective of the soul is eventually to come into that interrelation with the body, with the personality, and work out what that proper harmony is to eventually reveal a synthesized unit of wholeness. And so it's not yay soul, anti-body or anti-personality, but it is elevating up out of the instincts that are concerned with self-preservation, and we have to think that to be a human is to be part animal, right? We're not exactly an animal, but there is part of us that has an old instinctual form that keeps us maybe a bit preoccupied with the self and sustaining of the self based on fear a lot of the time. There is that part of us, so there is that merging with that other aspect of us which also makes us different from animals in that way of our having connection to something higher, our ability to reach for the stars, so to speak, and bringing in that quality to the instinctual consciousness so that the instinctual consciousness is no longer operating purely in the shadows, but rather it's integrated into more of just creating that practical humanity, but it's in service to that greater, broader serving principle. So, in terms of astrology, the birth chart, and when we start interpreting the birth chart esoterically, with the different kinds of delineations and interpretations that come with looking at the planets and the signs esoterically, reveals to us the way in which the soul is attempting to engage with and pattern consciousness. And so we can begin to see what might be an old expression through looking at the birth chart through a personality lens, and maybe looking at, okay, here's the esoteric lens, and this is pointing to this aspect of the person. Okay, so then the question is, how do we elevate this so that it starts working with that, and how does this want to engage with that, or how does the intelligence of the personality aspect merge so that it has its own fulfillment in alignment with that soul's purpose? So this is really what esoteric astrology is pointing to, is trying to reveal to us. The soul's intention, and an unbelievably helpful roadmap in terms of being able to understand why and how we have particular challenges, how and why certain aspects are harder for us than others, and to also show us exactly how our soul is wanting to fulfill itself in this lifetime. It is unbelievably helpful. I cannot tell you how many corners it can cut. It's not really cutting corners. There are no cheats on the path to individualization and truth, but in terms of that clearing up of confusion and helping you to go, oh yes, okay, so this is the nature of this challenge, and maybe this old part of my identity is coming up for this reason, and oh, I see that this is my higher part, and so okay, I have to da-da-da-da-da. And so it helps bring about a deeper inclusion through that ability to ascertain and differentiate the dualistic parts. Some of the shadows of the mystical approach to spirituality can just be it's all about unity and it's all about being an inclusion. But we have to see that there are dualistic aspects to ourselves, and that there are parts that are expressing in a form of energy and psychic life that are doing so just because of old pattern and habituated nature, rather than it being a true expression of our authenticity. I think most of us get that at some level, even if you just look at the evolution of a child to adolescence to adulthood. You might look at the chart and see how a certain placement has evolved throughout those stages, and where it begins and the desires of that part in the beginning versus where it matures to and how it eventually ends up seeking to express itself. So in traditional and exoteric astrology, it was often approached with just a research-based looking at, okay, we're going to track Mars and we've got a bunch of birth charts and we'll look at how Mars is impacting the lives of these people as it moves through the birth charts. And so a lot of that gathering of data has resulted in us being able to say, okay, well, Mars generally represents X, Y, Z. Mars transiting through the first house might show people getting cuts or being a little bit more accident prone and da-da-da-da-da. And so there's a partial truth to this, and there's plenty of evidence that points to those patterns being reoccurring and those themes, but traditional astrology does not answer the question of why. Why would it be the case that Mars expresses like that? Well, we don't know exactly why. That's, we have a mythology connected to it, and we see that that's how it manifests to some degree relative to the person's consciousness, but we don't know exactly why. So esoteric astrology answers that why. And in fact, that is an extremely complex and very intricate and highly detailed answer in terms of the different layers. But more or less, it just has to do with the fact that there is a vibrational and energetic signature to these planets and the signs themselves. The planets have an evolutionary journey just as any other part of life does, just as we do as humans, just as there is the obvious evolution of the planetary life with regards to plants and animals. So the planets are going through an evolutionary process as well, macrocosm to microcosm, hylozoism, as above so below. All of these are esoteric principles, right? But there is an energetic quality to the planets, and there is a specific reason that they affect us in certain ways. And in studying esoteric astrology and rayology, which is that partnering system, which I'm going to be talking about here on the channel as well, when we study, eventually, as we get more familiar with these energies as they move through our own charts, and we start to not just know the intelligence conceptually, but to use the theory insofar as it points us towards being able to actually see and feel the vibrational realities, to the point where you might be going through a significant transit and you don't just notice the effects of that transit in terms of the events happening in the life, which is the exoteric approach. You know, oh, this planet moved through here and I broke up with my boyfriend at that time, But it's not like that, but instead you feel the rayological energy and the life of that planet moving through you in a particular way and showing up as a different kind of transformation of consciousness or investigation or inquiry or whatever it is. So it's much more about bringing it into that inner connection to that cosmic, to the cosmic creation in that way. And so this all points us to that development of what is called in the Ageless Wisdom teachings, the development of occult or esoteric intuition. And this kind of intuition is a little different from, let's say, the more typical notion we have of intuition, which I would almost say an even more feminine-based intuition, as like a ground up, an instinctual intuition, something that senses things from below, which is also a very important kind of intuition, which that hasn't really been included, unfortunately, in our culture for a while, at least in the West. So that's an important kind of intuition. But esoteric intuition is really about the mind and the evolution of the perceptual body, so that we begin to see that which isn't tangibly there through purely the five senses, but it's much more energetic and subtle. And so that develops an intuitive and masterful higher mind. And of course, we all have a mind, and that's the prefrontal cortex, and the brain is very different in human beings when we compare that to animals. And so there's a function that we have as human beings in terms of what is the purpose of the brain, what is the purpose of the mind, and moving the mind and evolving the mind beyond simply the concrete five senses and being able to subtly intuit and sense those more subtle vibrations and forces. So the study of rayology, the study of esoteric astrology, and the Ageless Wisdom teachings in general help an individual to cultivate and stimulate that development of that kind of intuition, that esoteric intuition, to the point where when you get very, very masterful at it, you might meet a person and right away you can feel the rayological quality of a sign or a planet moving through their auric field and engaging with your body. So it starts to get super we're kind of talking about a sort of telepathic awareness here. And that takes a long time, perhaps many, many lifetimes to get to that point. But it's this sort of abstract, higher esoteric intuition that is developed as a consequence. So there's many more things that I could say about this subject matter, but I just for today wanted to give a very general overview as to what is the essence of esoteric astrology when we contrast it with the traditional approach, which is simply based on observing things of the form life versus that shifting into that more subtle sensing. And that shifting into the subtle senses cannot happen until there is that yearning from the individual to, it's like, yeah, okay, my form life and my gifts and this is all cool, but I sense that there's something else, there's something deeper than simply what I'm seeing or feeling or engaging with every day from the form aspect of life. There is something else trying to whisper through. And what is that force? And how do I discern and differentiate that from my form life? And so in moving into alignment with that, that's when we start to begin to perhaps repattern ourselves or become sensitive and start awakening to the planets and the zodiacal signs in the esoteric way that they influence us. So, and it can be quite a change in terms of how, and I've been using Mars as the example, Mars may have once expressed itself in a particular way prior to having that connection to solar consciousness. And as a consequence of having worked with the soul and have repatterning the vehicle, the way that Mars expresses itself no longer is in the same way, but now it reveals a different kind of impulse. So I think that is probably a good place to end today. If you like this subject matter, you'd be interested in learning more, you can like the video and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.